Ladies first.
Okay, so I'm Dr. Laurie Brinklow. I am an assistant professor at the University of Prince Edward Island. I'm the coordinator of the Master of Arts in Island Studies program, as well as the chair of the Institute of Island Studies. So you're sensing a theme here: islands, islands, islands all the time.
And in my case, I'm a professor of sociology. I'm a social scientist at the University of Malta. I spent 10 years at the same university that Laurie is in, the University of Prince Edward Island, as a Canada Research Chair. I was also, before Laurie, the president of the International Small Island Studies Association. And for my sins, back in 2006, I set up and ran for 11 years the Journal of Island Studies, or as it is officially known, Island Studies Journal. I'm also Malta's ambassador at large for islands and small states.
Thank you. So you will see here really the experts of island and archipelago studies and research since long time ago. So what do you think are the top challenges for archipelagos and island areas on a global scale?
Shall I start, Laurie?
Yes, please.
I mean, first of all, thank you for the question. And since you introduced even the factor of archipelagos, that in itself deserves credit. It's not every day that one hears questions or issues about islands that recognize that we are often dealing with archipelagos. So inter-island relations, island-island relations are extremely important. And for the past few years that the study of archipelagos has really taken off on its own footing, I think we are now realizing the importance of understanding better that island relations aren't just top-down, mainland island, but they are also island-island. We can call them horizontal relations, parallel relations, peer-to-peer relations. And those issues, of course, have a lot to do, I think, on two main fronts. I would single out the issues of governance. How are these islands administered? Are they administered from themselves, for themselves? Or are they, for example, managed and administered from a remote mainland or from a closed mainland? That makes a big difference in the way that power is organized and resources are distributed. The second point is connectivity. So island-island relations, again, are very often suffering from multiple levels of insularity, which means that to get from their place, their port, their airport, their seaport to somewhere else, they very often have to transit through a mainland, making life more difficult for their inhabitants and more challenging for any visitors and tourists who want to visit.
I'm seeing that firsthand here in Aruba, where we're having a conference on small island states and subnational island jurisdictions. And they talk about here in Aruba, if you want to go anywhere within the Caribbean, to Trinidad or to Cuba or to Saint Martin, even, you have to go to the mainland first. And they don't have any connectivity, ferries, boats, except the cruise ships, I suppose, going from port to port to port, which are for the tourists, not the locals. So it's a real issue here in the Caribbean. At home in Prince Edward Island, we have a little bit more connectivity. On Prince Edward Island, we have a bridge, and we can connect to the mainland and then to other islands in the area. We're an archipelago as it is with, we're quite far away, actually, 5.5 hours to Les Îles de Madeleine, which is a jurisdiction that belongs to Quebec, and they have to transit. If you are coming from Quebec, you have to transit through Prince Edward Island to get on a ferry to go to Les Îles de Madeleine. So they are doubly islanded, and you get this sense of, you know, I often feel that they feel left out, and because they're so far away from Quebec, they're more closely tied with the Atlantic region, but they can't. And so that's when you get those political issues happening and governance issues. So we kind of do these things off the books. It's sort of what Gerard Princeton in the Massey University in New Zealand has called an islandian sovereignty, where you start reaching out and doing things that, using your own jurisdiction that you have, your jurisdictional powers, to reach out to other islands. And you become this, as Godfrey said, that, you know, using connectivity in a different way, not just physical, but reaching out and learning from other islands. It's more of a just trying to ignore the mainland, the metropole, and carry on and out of sight, out of mind in many ways.
How is it on Prince Edward Island? Is it an own governmental unity, or it's belonging to the?
We belong to the Federation of Canada, but we are one of 10 provinces and 3 territories. We're the smallest province in the country. The country has what, 36 million, 40 million people. We have 180,000. So it's pretty small. We're about the size of a neighborhood in Toronto, which we often joke, but we have our own jurisdiction. We have a premier, we have representation in the federal government with 4 members of parliament and 4 senators. So we are fairly well represented, but we're still very much what we call a have-not province, in that we're not, we get transfer payments from the government to help us manage our affairs.
And what about Godfrey on Malta as a known country? Will that make it different and better for you compared to other islands?
Yes, so Prince Edward Island is Canada's smallest province. Malta is the European Union's smallest member, so far, at least, judging by population, because we're having a population boost right now, and possibly very soon we'll be overtaking Luxembourg. We'll see. It's a very small country by area. It's the 10th smallest country in the world, just 316 square kilometers of land area. We would fit very, very comfortably in Prince Edward Island if the Canadian government would like to invite the whole Maltese population to come to PEI. I think we'll take up the offer very quickly. Of course, it's an archipelago, so there are 3 populated islands here, apart from the main island, also called Malta. There's Gozo, which has a population of around 30,000 people, separated from Malta by 5-kilometer, 3-mile channel. Then there's a smaller island with only 2 remaining inhabitants. And the probability is that when these people pass, then the whole island will be much better confirmed as an island sanctuary. It already is, but of course, without a permanent population, its status as a sanctuary will be better enforced.
But I guess tourism is one of the main or the biggest industry.
You will be surprised. It is not the biggest industry. Malta has a fairly diversified economy. Laurie has been here, so she can vouch for that. Tourism is just 20% of GDP. We have manufacturing, we have transshipment, we have electronic gaming, so finance. There are a lot of sectors that make the Maltese economy fairly resilient and fairly diversified.
That's interesting, because I think most of us just think that tourism will be the main area.
And maybe perhaps to follow up on this, one of the reasons why we have this diversified economy, in spite of the smallness of the place and the absence of scale, is because we have a university. And we have had a university since 1592. I think it makes a big difference. So there is a considerable knowledge presence on the island. There is a commitment to support a tertiary education institution that also teaches in English. So this gives us a huge advantage in terms of attracting international students and international academic staff members. We're plugged into the European Union and the research community of Europe. So, you know, we participate very strongly in cutting-edge research activities, which put us not just on the academic map, but as I said, have also contributed to the economic portfolio of the country.
Yeah, that's really impressive. What about Prince Edward Island with main?
Our main industries are fishing and farming. Traditionally, they've been leading the way, very much an agrarian and inshore fishery economy, with lobsters now taking the world stage, and our oysters and our mussels and our potatoes, of course. And well, as many people say, we don't grow potatoes, we grow French fries. We grow potatoes for the Irvings to make French fries. So it seems to be that that's one of our main exports. But tourism is quickly coming up as it's a very close third in how it contributes to our GDP. And probably this past year, I would think we had maybe 1.3 or 1.4 million people coming throughout the year, which for 180,000 population is a lot. We also have a lot of seasonal residents in the summertime. So we get people who have bought land. Many of them are former islanders who bought land, built cottages, and come home every summer because there is a real pull to come. And we need to be working to document what kinds of contributions they make to the island as well. So yeah, it's there's a little bit of gaming and that we too have a very good university that's built on the backs of other universities and institutions. So we were one of the first institutes of island studies. That's what kind of sets us apart from the rest of Canada, and in some ways the rest of the world. There have been the Islands and Small States Institute where Godfrey is we're about the same age actually, and doing the same sorts of things. So I really love collaborating with you folks over there, and hope that we can continue to do that.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. My following question would be about the summer houses, but you already answered that. And then what about besides the tourism on Malta? Are there persons also coming there for longer periods?
Yes, one of the questions that you had asked us to prepare for deals with the top challenges for archipelagos and island areas. And I think to answer this question, I would very much like to refer to the fact that when we talk islands, we're probably talking about people who live there, but also two other kinds of people who come and go. So they could be workers, they could be tourists, they could be second home residents. They could be workers who eventually become settlers, right? All these categories of people are extremely important to island life, not just socially, but even economically. And then there's the other category that we often forget, the islanders who left. I don't think we can understand island life properly without factoring in these three subcategories of islanders. I would call them all islanders. Those who may be considered the natives, those who would have the strongest sense of entitlement to the place. They will be strongly opinionated. They would know where they want to go, and they wouldn't tolerate much interference by others. But whether they like it or not, they have to temper their views and opinions with also the views of those who have made the island their temporary home, possibly their permanent home, or who are members of the diaspora of that island, who would live abroad, would come and visit as tourists, but who will have huge nostalgia and huge love and pride from the fact of having come from those islands. I think those are the three categories, the tripod of island societies we need to factor in when studying islands.
Yes, thank you. And Laurie, do you agree with the top challenges, or do you have something?
I will add, I think that making sure that islands remain habitable, that there is not too much depopulation from islands that take it over a tipping point that it's no longer viable to live there. On the other hand, we have islands that are reaching the tipping point at the other direction, that there's too much pressure, too many people. As islands are, you know, by their definition, they have a limit, and that limit is to do with the land. And there's a lot of pressure on land on Prince Edward Island and other islands that competing interests is always another thing. How do we make sure that our citizens have clean water and the services that aren't depleted by multinational corporations coming in and scooping them all up for their purposes? So you end up with these, as I said, competing interests, and trying to figure out how you balance it. And for instance, on Prince Edward Island, we have a second land, somebody that's from Ontario, a couple that has bought up a piece of land, they're building a monster house on the beach, and they put in thousands and thousands of tons of rock to keep the shoreline from eroding. We are up in arms because suddenly that beach is not accessible. And so you have that competing interest. There doesn't seem to be any dialogue between the two. They've entrenched, we're entrenched. And so how do we move forward to do that? Or do we just let rising sea levels take care of it, because that's another issue on islands, of course, is climate change. And that's what we're discussing at this conference in Aruba is climate change, social change, and islandness. So how do we change attitudes towards making people realize that we need to do adaptation activities to be able to survive on this planet? Already we're seeing islands disappear, especially in the South Pacific. Prince Edward Island, we had a massive hurricane last year, damaged probably half of our forest. We were without power, some of us, for 3 weeks. And it suddenly erodes your sense of safety. But in one way, it was a very good wake-up call that people need to pay attention now, and we need to take adaptation measures more seriously.
What about climate change on Malta? You mentioned the drought now here before the recordings. Godfrey.
Yes. Listen, what Laurie is saying here reminds me that we have a very faulty definition of an island. We have to change it, because we very often naively define an island as a piece of land surrounded by water. The verb that we use suggests that the island and the water are two separate things, right? And they don't come together at all, except in some kind of an imaginary dark line, which represents the beach or the shore. It's not like that at all. The island and the sea are imbricated as one. It's one entity. It's a land-sea configuration. And land-sea, I mean it as one word, you know? The quicker we come around to understanding this, as Laurie has explained, the better we are attuned with the circumstances that explain island life, the better we are able to face, I think, the configuration of nature and culture in islands. I think it's a wake-up call, another wake-up call, that needs to drive our research and the way we create public policy.
Then we also want to see advantages and positive sides. So I wonder if you have some examples of that from your research and your islands for the island life now and in the future.
So let me start here, and I guess this is the last question. Your question reminds me of the article penned by David Chandler and Jonathan Pugh from 2021, titled "There Are Only Islands at the End of the World." It's a great title. It's a very provocative title. It shifts our islands from being peripheral and marginal to bang in the center of things. And I think we are living at a time where indeed a lot of people are looking at islands as the places where possibly solutions are possible. Solutions can be secured for the big challenges of the world, whether it's decarbonization, whether it's sustainable development, you know, all these big picture items. Perhaps islands are the places where one can start, let's call an experiment, play around with variables. They are limited because the island, of course, is already limited. The likelihood of success is greater at lower expense and at lower resistance. We are living at a time where it's not only about people being passionate about change and transitioning to a more sustainable lifestyle, but we're also finding the resistance and the problems that especially large countries are facing in order to turn the aircraft carrier. You know, turning an aircraft carrier takes time and patience, and you bump into a lot of resistance and friction. Islands are possibly the ways in which we need to really invest and focus in order to provide lessons for the rest of the world. So this is a wonderful twist on the usual paradigm, on the usual way we've looked at islands. It's not the mainlands telling islands what to do, giving them development recipes and plans. It's the islands telling the mainlands what they need to do.
That's correct. Yes, thank you. And Laurie.
And within all of those islands are some very ingenious people, very creative people, because they've had to, out of necessity, to survive. And so it's those kinds of folks that are driving what Godfrey's talking about, that search for solutions. And because we have those interconnected relationships, those entanglements on islands, we're able to manipulate things more quickly. We're more nimble and use those connections that we have with one another, islands around the world that are all doing this. And so I often hear the expression islands punch above their weight. And we do, because we've had to. And, you know, so too often we've been put shunted to the periphery because we are out of sight, out of mind in some ways. Also, as one scholar has said, we're the scapegoat through which the mainland pours its ills, but we fight back. We are resilient and strong and have a fighting spirit that is going to persevere. So yeah, I think we have something to show the world.
Thank you. And I think that was the perfect sentence to end this, because our time is running out. So I will thank you so much for discussing with me today, both Godfrey Baldacchino from Malta and Laurie Brinklow from Prince Edward Island.